That's what I'll do.
In the class.
Okay, recording in progress. Okay,
Thank you.
I think we'll get
Ruth is-
started. I see.
Hi, Ruth, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. We're going to get started now.
Okay, Ruth is joined. Oh, there's Ruth.
And
Okay.
she's there.
Here I am. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I guess I had the wrong, I was using
the-
the wrong link. I didn't have the wrong link, but I was using the wrong link.
All right, welcome, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of 2023 of our bi-weekly Zoom group of sons and daughters of Holocaust survivors. We are one of the first 2G groups in the world, founded in 1979 in Philadelphia. Today, we have the honor of being joined by several guests,
Start the picture.
notably 3 women who wrote 3 chapters of this extraordinary new book, 3 of 16 short memoirs by our fellow 2Gs who all met, if I'm not mistaken, through a synagogue in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
That's right.
Correct.
So we will hear today from Fran Lewy Berg or Lewy Berg. Lewy Berg, who grew up in Montreal. Eszter Gombosi, who grew up in Hungary. And Ruth Finkel Wade, who grew up in Chicago and now lives in Florida.
Right.
I have read the extremely powerful chapters written by our 3 special guests. And I will try to refrain from giving away any of it so as not to interfere with their individual presentations. But trust me, they're all uniquely experienced, uniquely written, and uniquely felt. And I will only say that I consider this book to be a significant contribution to Holocaust literature, and dare I say, essential reading for all of us 2Gs. So I urge you to order it on Amazon. I'll show it to you one more time, and the link to it is in the email that I sent you.
Can you mention the book, because you dropped the front.
Sure,
Okay.
Peter. It's called The Ones Who Remember, 2nd-Generation Voices of the Holocaust. And Peter, the link is in the email that I sent around.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to thank our member Isabel Redner Alkoff. Would you raise your hand? Or your hands? Isabel is the one who heard these speakers in St. Louis and recommended this book and organized this special meeting. So thank you very much, Isabel. We also have a number of other distinguished guests on the call today, and I'll introduce them later on. I will only say it's wonderful to see all of you. So now I give you Ruth Finkel Wade, one of the authors who also served as one of the editors of this book. Ruth, take it away.
Thank you, David. And Isabel, we met at the conference in St. Louis, and it was like this instant welcome. I was so appreciative. And since then, speaking with so many 2Gs, it's just been such a pleasure to connect with this group, all of these groups. And it's really an honor for us to be here today. And I want to thank you all for having us. And yes, I was asking Isabel about how long you've been meeting, and very long time. So I thought our group had been meeting for a long time, but you beat us by a long shot. So congratulations to have a group that continues to get together and learn from each other and support each other. Our group started in 2004. As David said, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We all belonged to the same temple. Temple Beth Emmet. And one of our members said to the rabbi, I think you can do better when it comes to Holocaust remembrance. And he said, okay, well, what do you want to do? And so she said, I want to put a group together. And she did. And we began writing and leading the service for Yom HaShoah using our parents' stories. And then we were asked to start doing some of the Yom Kippur afternoon services as well. And after a time, we thought, some of us thought like, well, maybe we can take some of these narratives that we've used and put them into a book. I mean, how hard could that be? And, it took 7 years. That's how hard it can be. So 7 years later, we published, and through that process, we went through a lot together, and we were very lucky to be a safe group together to go through our stories ourselves. We did a version after a few years that we started talking to publishers about, and also one of the survivors in our group, Irene Butter, who said to us, where's your voice in this? You're telling your parents' stories, but what about you? And, we were all kind of looked at each other like, well, and I'm sure, you all can relate to this, like, well, who cares about us? I mean, it's our parents that went through that major trauma and, with the concentration camps and hidden in small spaces and, run on the run and all, what do our issues have, compared to that? As a matter of fact, my father's still living, and I was with him in Tucson a few weeks ago, and I gave a talk in Tucson, and he goes, why, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he's like, well, why does anybody care about your stories? It's about me, basically, but then he saw the turnout and how people reacted to it. And he said, well, there's something there. It was really funny and interesting. But so we had to kind of, get to a place where we thought, okay, of course, we're never going to walk in our parents' shoes, thank God. But, but our issues are worth, talking about. Perhaps other people can connect with them. And the other thing that we had to kind of deal with was a sense of betrayal. And I'm one of two members who have living parents, and very difficult, for all of us, even with the parents that are no longer with us, to, air this kind of dirty laundry or the challenges of growing up, with our parents. Of course, there was joy in our lives and in their lives, but also this, it wasn't a happily ever after story, as you all know. It wasn't like, okay, I'm liberated, everything's good now. So we had to kind of work through that together, and came down to an understanding of legacy, and all of us, with our parents passing on and aging, deciding that we wanted to have an obligation to speak out. We can't walk in our parents' shoes, but through our own intergenerational lens, we can kind of sew together our stories together and help people understand not only what happens, when you dehumanize people, like our parents were dehumanized and brutalized and murdered, families murdered, but also for any generations that grow up under the trauma that comes along with it, to be able to connect with those people too, to say you're not alone, and and we hear you. So from adversity, comes these gifts of strength and post-traumatic growth. This Fran coined for me that term, and take from them those gifts of fortitude and resilience and compassion and tolerance from our parents, and move forward with that. I'm going to start with talking about my chapter a little bit, and then we'll have Eszter, and then we'll have Fran, and then we're going to have lots of time for discussion. My chapter, and I think most of us in my group would agree, it brought some surprises in terms of a deeper understanding of our parents and our relationships with our parents, and a healing. And I speak for myself, especially, for those of you who read my chapter, know that, it was not an easy relationship between me and my father, but the actual writing of this chapter really helped me to let go of a lot of my own anger and frustration. And we have the best he's 91, but we have the best relationship we've ever had. And a lot of us experienced improved relationships with siblings and other relations. So with my dad, he was only 8 when the war began, and 13 when he was in Buchenwald, went on the death march, and he was liberated in Theresienstadt. He was very dehumanized. He survived by numbing his emotions and suppressing his desire to love, and that tactics helped him to survive as a child, through those formative years. But, there was also an impact of that, because it took a long time for him to be able to really, truly feel emotions, and other than anger and rage, and to be able to love and really, really love again, and be a real, true father a loving father to his children was hard for him. He saw when they were in the ghetto. He grew up in a small town in central Poland called Pietrków-Trybunalski. It was about 60,000 people and about 15,000 Jews. And when they were actually the first ghetto. So when the Nazis came into Poland and took over, he was, his family, that put 15,000 Jews put into a ghetto for housing for 5,000. And during that time, as a kid, he said it didn't really bother him so much, because he was just a kid and he adjusted. But he saw his sister, who was 20 years older than him and married. She got pregnant, and her father was able to smuggle her into a Catholic hospital, where she had to deliver the baby, but was discovered, and the baby was thrown out the window, and she was taken to the cemetery and shot and killed. And when he found out about that, he cried. He loved her so much, but then, but that was like the last time he cried. So that was kind of the beginning of, numbing emotions for him. Just this tactic of love is not going to work, wasn't going to work for him anymore. So I've inherited a little bit of that from him, this ability to numbing emotions. Which I've worked on over the years. And I think that the best healing for me was getting a dog, because especially recently, I've had some issues with my dog, and it's like, oh my God, I'm so sobbing all the time. But but it's good. It's good. So I'm going to read a little bit from my chapter, starting on page 276, a little bit about living with my dad. I don't remember living with my father. He moved out when I was 2 and remarried when I was 4. He lived on the south side of Chicago, and I lived on the north side, a world away. I saw him on occasional weekends and on school holidays, along with my brother Leon, who was 2 years older than me. As we waited for our father to pick us up, I fixated on the window. We competed to see who could spot him first. This helped me to get through the interminable wait. From what I recall, my dad was always late, and sometimes he didn't show up at all. When I was little, it was a huge disappointment, but I was usually placated by his big hugs and our adventures at the zoo or trips to the toy store. When I got older, seeing him became agonizing. His first comment to me was always about my looks. I put on a little weight, or I had lost a little weight. In my early teens, he gave me a book about hair and makeup. What was this message? Was I supposed to win his love by improving my appearance? His 2 stepdaughters from his wife Jean's first marriage were of Swedish descent, blonde, tall, thin, and he loved to boast about how beautiful they were. And I took this bragging personally. Clearly, I wasn't pretty enough. And when we went to his house, I got little attention. I was immediately sent off to play with the girls. When I confronted him about his focus on my looks, He would go off on a rant about how women had it so much better in the past. Modern, educated career women couldn't be happy, he said. Was he purposely pushing my buttons, or did he really believe this? Either way, it was infuriating and offensive. When I plucked up the courage to talk to him about not spending time with me, he would deny it or make an excuse. Any confrontation on my part was met with a retort that left me feeling like I was crazy, like any deficit in the relationship was my fault. In college and during my mid-20s, I decided that I had two choices when it came to my dad: acknowledge him and feel my self-esteem plummet, or ignore him. Avoiding the relationship wasn't difficult. I didn't see him or talk to him very often anyway, but inevitably he would pop back into my life. I would end up feeling hurt and the cycle would begin again. So here's this man who pretty much abandoned, I felt abandoned anyway, abandoned me both physically and emotionally. And he wasn't really interested in who I was. And he was a Holocaust survivor, so I needed to get over it. You know, not so easy. But there are also, so I want to talk a little bit about the gifts. The main reason why I think we've been able to repair and heal in our relationship is that he is a processor and he's always been interested in healing. And I have this inherited from him as well. As he worked through his healing and he continues to work through it, our relationship has been able to improve. And from writing my chapter, I gained some keen insights into my own issues, but also a deeper understanding of how he suffered even after the war, and how his resilience and courage in processing allowed our relationship to heal. So we are both healing processors, even to this day, and he has found and accepted love in his life. At age 91, he says he's the happiest he's ever been. And yes, like I said before, since writing my chapter, our relationship has really never been better. I'm going to read the last paragraph of my chapter. I'm not a Holocaust survivor, but I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I didn't live the Holocaust, but I have lived the consequences, the abandonment, the anger, the blaming, and ultimately the unbelievable awe of survival. I love my dad, and I'm grateful that I am capable of loving him. Forgiveness starts with ourselves.
Beautiful. Very good.
So, thank you. And as David said, all of our chapters, and we worked hard to there's definitely threads that run through all of us, but we're all very different. And so I'm really, pleased. I mean, I'm pleased with any of our authors that would be here today, of course, but I'm really pleased that Eszter and Fran are here because their stories, while there is a thread of similarity, are very different. And so, I know that there are parts and pieces of all of us that you can connect with. So I'm going to hand it over to Eszter.
You're on mute.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us. I am not going to read from my chapters. I will just try to briefly summarize what I am writing about, and then this way we could have more time for discussion later, I think. I am a child of two Holocaust survivor parents who both were from Hungary and returned to their native country after liberation. I was born just a few years after their return and was raised and educated in Hungary. I only came to the US at age 30 with my husband and two small children, hence the accent. My parents were married in 1939 and had their firstborn son in 1942. At that time, my father was already conscripted into forced labor, as were most Jewish men from Hungary. He was away from his family most of the time between the years of 1942 and 1944. Hungary was only occupied by the Germans in March of 1944. So up to that point, even though subjected to severe discriminatory laws, the Jews of Hungary lived in relative peace. However, after the occupation, the Germans managed to clear the countryside of Jews with lightning speed. The fate of the Jews in the capital city of Budapest was slightly better. In the liquidation process, the Hungarian authorities, as well as most of the population, were of great help to the Germans. My mother, together with her 19-month-old son, her mother and my father's parents were herded into the ghetto of their small town, Pécs, and after 2 months living under unimaginable circumstances, they were deported in cattle cars to Auschwitz. There, the baby and the grandparents were gassed immediately. My mother was selected to work and was later transported to Lippstadt, Germany. In a talk that she gave to the liberating American soldiers, she described her experiences in deportation and forced labor. Excerpts from her essay can be found in my chapter starting on page 210, if you want to look it up. My father, upon returning from forced labor, was immediately deported to Dachau, where he spent the rest of the war. He was liberated in the last days of the war. My parents found each other in a displaced persons camp in Germany in the summer of 1945 and returned to Pécs together. In 1946, they had a second son who, due to medical malpractice, died at 4 months. After that, my mother was severely ill until I was born a couple of years later. No wonder they treated me as a jewel and protected me from life itself. They lived in constant fear that they would lose me too, so they never permitted me to do most of the normal activities that a child my age should have been doing. I think they assumed they would lose me because in their minds, it must have seemed inevitable that a child is only born to them to be lost. This was the backdrop of my life growing up. Another aspect of their protectiveness was that they denied my Jewish identity. They completely broke with their Jewishness, arguing that then we cannot be persecuted in the future. I grew up not really knowing what my true identity was, which caused me a severe identity crisis later in my life. And in turn, I couldn't provide a complete identity to my children for many years. I write about the challenges of this process in my chapter as well. In summary, I have to say that I grew up in a very small but loving and nurturing family, which valued education very highly and provided me with many opportunities to learn and grow in many areas: music, foreign languages, the arts, and the sciences. My parents were very learned people, my father a lawyer, and my mother a PhD scholar of German and French and later Russian literature. In spite of what they had gone through, they did an amazing job in creating a good life and a stable home environment for me, but they couldn't shake the deep trauma that made its mark on everything, every day of their existence. I unconsciously felt this growing up, and it became part of me. I was a very fearful child and young adult, obeyed and feared authority beyond reason, and had problems making friends. I was only able to shake most of these traits after moving to the US, where I got the necessary support to calm my fears and become more self-confident and resilient. I believe I have managed to raise my children to become strong and resilient adults without most of these issues, and by remembering the past They pass along positive characteristics to the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also very beautiful.
First, I want to thank you all for being here today. It's so good to be amongst you. We do a lot of these presentations, but your being two Gs as well makes this presentation all the more special and thankful. Our parents' survival was an unlikely miracle, and as such, our being here today together is a miracle as well. So my family background. My parents were born in the small town of Yaroslav, Poland. They knew each other as children growing up before the war. My mother was 16 and my father 18 when the war broke out. Both were in forced labor camps during the war. My mother in Poland, my father in Siberia. My mother's sister and young niece survived the war, as did my father's mother. Everyone else in their families perished. My parents immigrated to Montreal after the war. Out of the ashes, my parents built lives for themselves that were meaningful and rich. My mother created a wide circle of good friends and was known for her joie de vivre. She was passionate about family and the beauty in nature. My father lived a true rags to riches story. He arrived in Montreal with only 2 gold coins sewn into the waistband of his pants, and he became a successful real estate developer and a leader in the Montreal Jewish community. Now I'd like to address a challenge that I grappled with growing up, something that shaped my life. I don't know when I first became aware of the Holocaust. It seems there never was a time that I wasn't. So it was that for as long as I can remember, it was my mission to make up to my parents for what they had suffered. I was supposed to not have needs. If I could not always bring them joy, I most certainly was not to bring them heartache. I was a good girl, and whatever I did that was not good, which was plenty, I did behind their back so they wouldn't know. But no matter how hard I tried to please or overachieve or protect, making up for my parents' losses was as impossible a mission as it was consuming. How could I be enough? The words, "You are good enough just the way you are," that I impart to my psychotherapy clients and to my daughter and to my granddaughter bring tears to my eyes even as I say them. I struggled with how to achieve autonomy in my life when it seemed they needed me to remain entangled and meshed in theirs, how to honor them and lift them up while fighting for my boundaries. Boundaries in a family where enmeshment was an understandable response to the threat of separation and loss. I didn't rebel in my teens. Compromising my autonomy was a price I paid for holding my parents up. Separation and loss, understandably, were agony for them, and I believe treating me as younger than I was, encouraging my dependence on them, was a way of ensuring I not leave. Separation and loss are issues I have spent years of therapy and thousands of dollars on. The passage I'm going to read starts on page 266, and it describes my quandary over putting my parents' needs over my own. I was late one day when, instead of returning home from school directly, I went to a friend's house. On my return, I found my mother trembling in the kitchen. She had gotten hold of my personal phone book and had contacted all my friends and acquaintances in a desperate attempt to find me. Mortified, I hollered, "It makes me look like such a baby. How could you do such a stupid, stupid thing?" My mother's expression went blank. My father grabbed me by the shoulders and pulled me into the hallway. He looked at me gravely and delivered the stinging message. Mummy's experience during the war was that if someone was 5 minutes late, you never saw them again. I had committed the greatest sin, the violation of my code to never add to my parents' suffering, but I was only 12. Couldn't I just be mad that my mother had embarrassed me? Couldn't I just stamp my feet at the unfairness of it all? No, that was a luxury I didn't have. When would I have suffered enough for people to protect me, to avoid hurting me at all costs, to make it their goal to not disappoint me and make me happy? It was not until I suffered my own emotional crisis and experienced a depression so debilitating that I had to leave graduate school and return to my parents' home that I realized the answer to that question. Never. It will never be my turn. For years, I carried on a heated debate with myself. What did I owe my parents, and what did they owe me? For the longest time, I struggled to figure out whose needs were greater, whose rights more legitimate. I wrestled with whether I should side with my parents' needs or my own. The heat of that debate eventually transformed into sorrow. As I left the self-centered world of adolescence, I could begin to put myself in my parents' heavy shoes. As I look back on that scene in our kitchen of an emotionally wrought mother and her enraged daughter, I feel waves of sorrow for them both. I want to move on to a gift that I inherited, which was the importance of family, a deep-seated recognition of its preciousness and its sacredness. I received the gift of warmth and connection. I'd also like to speak to a gift that came out of my journey. Living in the shadow of my parents' trauma growing up, to writing about that experience has been life-changing in many positive ways. The term post-traumatic growth has been used to refer to such change. For me, writing this memoir resulted in a new understanding of myself. I emerged with a newfound sense of personal strength and resilience. It also resulted in my increased compassion for my parents, my brother, and myself. And so, years after my parents' death, my relationship with them has improved. What I didn't know on embarking on this book was that it would result in the opening of exploring new possibilities for me, such as spreading Holocaust and post-trauma education in the world. The ability to make sense of tragedy and then find benefit in it is key to unlocking post-traumatic growth. The social activism of several members of our group speaks to this, as does the poetry that others in our group have written. For me, it is my work as a psychotherapist. My parents did not speak about the Holocaust. In fact, when I chose the topic of the generational impact of the Holocaust on children of survivors for my doctoral dissertation, my father forbid it in those very words. My journey was one of going from my parents' post-traumatic silence to my discovery of my voice. Our second generation group is made up of people who are accomplished, if not overachievers, who succeeded, if not excelled, in the business of living. That we grew up in the context of inconceivable loss speaks to both our parents and our own post-traumatic growth. Thank you.
Beautiful. Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Fran, can you address, please, your own loss, the specifics of your own loss? I think it's an extremely important aspect of your story.
So loss was always a terrible thing for my parents. And when somebody died, even when somebody became seriously ill, they reacted with shock, like that wasn't a normal part of the life cycle. For myself, tragically, my parents died in a car accident when they were traveling in Switzerland. My mother was 59 and my father was 61, and I wasn't quite 30. And what I tried to do with their loss was bury it, sort of just shove it aside, not deal with it because it was too difficult. And for myself, as for my parents, the pain leaked out sideways. And then in writing this essay and in the work I do with psychotherapy clients, it's the opposite of burying the pain. It's the opposite of remaining silent. And I'm proud of that growth.
Thank you, Fran. Ruth, your father had to forgive himself. Can you talk about that, please?
Sure. So when my father was in Buchenwald, he was separate. So my father always idolized his father. He was the youngest of 5 children, and his father absolutely adored him. And he was his hero. But by the time he was in Buchenwald, he was so dehumanized that when he met his father in the camp, because they were separated, his father went to hug him and offer him a piece of bread. He was being transitioned out to Dora Mittelbau, which was an underground ammunition plant. And my father just like turned away from him. He accepted the bread, but he turned away from this man who was, his idol, but he no longer could love. And he said, he has a book, and he wrote in his memoir that, he felt like he had become an animal, just like the Nazis said that they were. And that thoughts went through his head like, the old people don't deserve to live. He just like turned away from his father with these thoughts. And so that haunted him for the rest, for his entire life afterwards, to treat his father like that. And he, over time, began to go through a forgiveness process. And we went to Buchenwald together as a family, my brother and him and his wife. And he took us to the space where he thought that he had last seen his father. And we all kind of put our arms around each other, and he started speaking to his father and saying, I'm so sorry. I know that you forgive me. I know that you love me. I love you. I know you would be so proud of me and my grandchildren. And that just really helped him to kind of move past some of that difficulty.
And that is, I think, a very, very powerful portion of your chapter, Ruth, where you show what your father said to his father so many decades later, with his family by his side. Can you read that? It's very short.
Yeah, and I was really, let's see if I can find it.
I think it's right near the end.
Okay. Oh yeah, here it is. And also, and I would say, and I was like really lucky because I had one of those little flip cameras. They don't even make those anymore. And I don't know, for some reason I had it in my pocket and I just turned it on in my pocket. So I actually like caught that recording of him saying it. So, which is, I treasure. On this space of ground here, I am thinking of the day we met in Buchenwald. I was embarrassed and disappointed that I didn't act as the loving son that I should have, and I'm sorry. But I know that you can feel that I am here with your grandchildren, Leanne and Ruth. And I can see you smiling and can see how happy you are that I survived. You live in my spirit, and I loved you, and I'm sorry you didn't make it. I just want to tell you that I know that you're here with us, and I feel your presence. And we are here on the spot to tell you that we all love you very much.
Thank you. And I know that you had to make a difficult decision yourself to essentially change your relationship with your dad. at a certain point. And it worked, right?
Yeah, I mean, it worked. It was, it was still, it took time. It was rocky, but I had to disassociate myself from his second family and that dynamic and just, say, I want to have a relationship with you, but it's gotta be us, not this bigger relationship.
Thank you, Ruth. And Esther also had to make a tough decision. Esther and her family emigrated to the United States, leaving her parents behind in Hungary. Can you speak about that a little bit, Esther?
Yeah, I mean, that haunts me every day to this day, because basically what we did to our parents, both sets of parents, was what the Holocaust did to them in a way. You can look at it that way. We left them behind to their old age without support and presence. And, in those days, that was way before the internet or the iPhone or anything like that, or Zoom. So communication was really difficult. It was basically snail mail, and that didn't happen very often. And also we were kind of without passports for a long time between the two countries. So we couldn't travel, and our parents were already elderly, and it was difficult for them. So they couldn't come out often and see their grandchildren, their beloved grandchildren. My parents, since I never had siblings, my parents only had these two of our children for grandchildren. We had an incredibly close relationship while we still lived in Hungary, and then we just tore them away from one day to the next from them, and they couldn't really continue with that relationship. I guess it was difficult, not just on my parents, but also on my children. And so this was really difficult. And then when they were getting really older and sicker, then I was not able to be at their bedside. My mother suffered a heart attack and was in the hospital dying, and I jumped on the plane, but the plane was late. So by the time I got there, she already died. So I couldn't even say goodbye to her. And my father had colon cancer, and I had to place him in a home for older people, which is not great. I guess in this country it's not that great, but in Hungary it's like 10 times worse. And I couldn't be there and visit him. And he also died alone. So basically both of my parents died alone. So these all bear down very heavily on me.
Thank you for sharing that, Esther. One of the aspects of your chapter that is so unusual is your perspective, the opportunity, I guess, that you had in your life to actually compare what happened under the Nazis to what happened under the Soviet system, because you grew up under the Soviet system. And as you wrote, growing up under the Soviet system in Hungary helped you to appreciate the freedoms that you enjoy in the United States. But we understand and we feel your pain and your emotion at leaving your parents behind. Your parents never had really the opportunity to recognize the freedoms that we enjoy here.
Yes, and my parents died really early on. They both died in the early 90s. And that was way before all this heavy-duty discussion about Holocaust experiences and, awakening to recognizing the pain and the post-traumatic stress disorder and everything that people have to deal with. This was way before that. So I regret very much that I didn't have the opportunity to really explore all these things with my parents. I also never had the opportunity to ask them questions about how their life, their Jewishness was before the war, because it was not on my radar screen since I was brought up not being Jewish, not taught that I was Jewish. So I didn't even know that these questions existed. And by the time I awakened to this, they were already gone. So, you know, also I am sure my mother would have made an excellent contribution to the Shoah project, but she died before that happened. So we don't have anything. The only thing I have is that essay that she gave to the American liberators right after liberation, so fresh out of the camp. And that actually a copy of that resides in the Holocaust Museum and another one in Yad Vashem.
Thank you. We have another former Hungarian resident on the call today, Anna.
Yeah, I see that from the name.
Yes, Anna's husband, Peter, was a Mengele twin at Auschwitz. And as I have told Anna, my late father, who was a prisoner at Auschwitz, vividly remembered the arrival of the Hungarian Jews late, very late in the war, and they still were oblivious. They still did not realize what was happening there. They were asking the prisoners behind the barbed wire fence, how are things here, Kinderlach? And my father said they did not have the heart to tell them that they were going to end up in those chimneys smoking 24 hours a day. I wanted to ask Anna if you have any thoughts or questions for Eszter.
No, Eszter, did you just say that you are from Page?
Yes,
My husband is from Page.
interesting. Small world.
We were from Budapest, but interesting. My parents were totally opposite than what you guys were saying. My father was extremely loving. He couldn't pass us without giving us a stroke or a kiss. And I had to think, when Fran was saying about if you were late, my mother called hospitals if I was 10 minutes late. So that's typical.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's open it up to the group if anyone has any questions for any of our authors. Simone?
Ruth, do you think that your father's attendance at AA and being part of that program helped the relationship that the two of you were able to have? You're muted.
Yes, I don't think we could have had a relationship without it. It really helped him find community. He wasn't really able to find that through Judaism, but the community became kind of his higher power. And they were so loving and supportive of him that they really got him on his path to healing and to that whole journey of, you know, looking inward and of coming to me and anybody else to apologize and, you know, finding out that I'm not crazy after all. You know, and yeah, thank you for asking that. And it's been interesting because he's never really kept it a secret, but he's never really talked about it either. And I guess I didn't even quite realize that when I put that in my chapter that, you know, it was the first time I was making that public. But he's really, he you know, it took him a little bit to get used to that, but he talks about it publicly now too. So it's just, he's always looking for a way to heal. It's cool.
You know, similarly, I think Esther's mother, right, became a heavy smoker. I don't know, Eszter, whether she had been a heavy smoker before the war.
I mean, I don't know because I wasn't around, but she was smoking from age 16, as far as I understand, but I don't know how heavy smoker she was before the war, but after the war, it was unbelievable. I mean, one thing after the next.
Father had the opportunity that a lot of our parents didn't have to be in a community of healing. I
Right.
think most of our parents just went on with their lives, and the idea of doing that, of opening up in that way, wasn't something they were able to do, or wasn't something that they had the opportunity to do. So it's really great that your father was able to do that, and the benefit for the two of you.
Yeah, I feel very grateful.
Simone is a psychotherapist and a longtime leader of the Sons and Daughters Group in Philadelphia. Peter Grumbacher, I'm going to introduce you before I allow you to speak. He is a longtime Reform rabbi at Temple Beth Emeth in Wilmington. So those of you who are from the Ann Arbor group will feel that camaraderie, because the synagogue that around which you coalesced is also a Reform synagogue in Ann Arbor. Peter, please.
Yeah, there's also one in Albany, and I think other places too. I want to thank everybody for welcoming me, basically. I have a question. Has anybody ever read the book, The Children of the Holocaust by Helen Epstein?
Yeah.
Yes, and in fact, there are a number of references to that seminal book in this book. Certainly that was the first book to address the whole issue of transferal of trauma from the Holocaust.
Yeah, well, it really impacted me. And I noticed, very interestingly, there are a whole bunch of people who are on right now who went into the mental health business. And I know that, you know, I became an MSW about 10 years after I became a rabbi. And my daughter is an MSW as well. But I think there are a lot of people who are children of Holocaust survivors, you know, who needed to help themselves and went into the business, so to speak, so that they would have a clear understanding of what they went through. But the point I'm making is that Helen Epstein's book, which was really one of the first, I don't have it anymore. I don't have the volume anymore. But it really made an impact on me when she said, and I'm not quoting, our parents knew why the black cloud was hanging over our homes, but we didn't know. And the fact that they were silent did not help. And of course, they had reasons for being silent. I do a talk, I've done it around the country, on my dad's experiences in Dachau, and then as a soldier in World War II in the United States Army. And the talk is called Sharing the Silence, because I had to pull teeth to find out anything. But when parents make a decision, either because they're now in a new land and they don't want the burden falling upon their children, or it's PTSD, whatever the reason is, it really does impact us. And so that's what I'm saying, that Helen Epstein's book really opened my eyes to this.
I just want to say, yeah, we do have quite a few of the helping people in our group. And one of the things that when we were talking about writing this book, and we had a meeting, and somebody posed the question, has anyone's parents ever suffered from depression? And even though we'd been meeting for many years and telling each other stories for many years, we didn't know this. Every hand went up. And then the follow-up question was, well, have your parents been treated for depression, either with medication or in a hospital? And every hand went up. It was something that we had never talked to each other about, but it was something that, that black cloud was there in our lives.
I just want to mention one thing. In one of my audiences, I spoke at the University of Iowa, and I remember distinctly, there were 8 women who showed up. And they were really very, very close friends. They showed up. Each one of them was a child of a survivor, but they didn't know about the others being children of survivors. So they were very close, and they decided to form their own group, afterwards. But it's really amazing how we sort of bury even the identity within ourselves, let alone the stories that we might or might not have heard.
That's right. Thank you, Peter. Matt and Susan.
Fran, you had written, and I quote, overprotectiveness goes hand in hand with neglect. I absolutely felt that overprotectiveness, and as a result, I was extremely overprotective of my children, especially if it had medical concerns or anything like that. And in fact, one of my sons kind of made fun of me about that. You helped me understand some of that, but I'd like you to talk about what you mean by the overprotectiveness goes hand in hand with neglect.
You know, it was the example of my mother letting me play. We lived in an apartment building, and there was traffic and there were people walking down the street, and I was playing in front of the apartment building on the grass there alone. And I was just 5. And, you know, it's very difficult for me to put that together with how overprotective she was and my father was. And it was my therapist who said that the two go hand in hand. So that was enlightening for me. And I think there was this mother love that I experienced and this over involvement, if you will. But when I left Montreal, I was a little bit out of sight, out of mind for her. And that contrast again, I think those things can go together. I can't explain it beyond that, but just that they occur together is fascinating to me.
Thank you. Stephen Ludson, you had your hand up. Stephen is an attorney in New York, whom I invited to join us here. He also has a group of 2Gs who meet every 2 weeks by Zoom in New York at 11 a.m. So it doesn't even conflict with our 2 o'clock meeting. Stephen was the first 2G among the early members of the United States Holocaust Memorial Commission. Is that right, sir?
Yes, David. It was technically, it was the President's Commission on the Holocaust, which was formed during the Carter administration. And through a pure luck and pluck, I was the only child of a Holocaust survivor on the original panel. And then I got appointed to the first United States Holocaust Memorial Council that actually built the museum. I was on that for 10 years. And also in the first group, I was the only child of a survivor. And hearing everybody's stories today, obviously is very powerful. And I commend the authors for having such insight and such courage to be able to, in effect, pull all that up to the surface, because that's hard work. But it also reminded me that I think I've been my own psychotherapist, because in part I had to be my mother's psychotherapist, and she suffered very, very terribly. And my father luckily got out before the war, so he had a different survivor guilt, but he was the pillar in the family. So I guess I'm saying this because I had the contradictions, as all of us did, but my range was so wide. And yet luckily I was able to channel that and have the, the presence of mind. Back in 1975, I just was troubled that there was no remembrance of the Holocaust in New York City, which had the second largest Jewish population of survivors in the world. And so I went down that road, never imagining by forming a nonprofit corporation, poetically called the Remembrance of the Holocaust Foundation, that I was going to leverage that into a presidential appointment. And that's a very long story, and I won't, take up your time on it, but thank you for the introduction. Thank you for letting me participate. I also want to invite or also indicate Gabriela Maros is sometimes in Austria, sometimes in Berlin. She moves around. And Avi Appelstein, they were the group that
I'm living in Munich.
Sorry. So in any event, I just also want to introduce Avi. I feel like I've been the conduit to bring them. And furthermore, I was so happy when I spoke to David, who I originally reached out to when he was a journalist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and he wrote a beautiful piece when Elie Wiesel passed away. And then more recently, I reached out to Susan Kleiman and her brother Jeffrey. We had a wonderful conversation. So thank you, because I wrote a letter to the editor to the Philadelphia Inquirer about Lucy the elephant. And so it's all kind of together. And I like to write. I've thought about writing a book, but I effectively have written a book because I've had about 380 letters to the editor published throughout every publication all over the country. I would say at least 1/3, if not half, are about the Holocaust. And so if anybody's interested, you can Google me. But I have to tell you, to the 3 women that wrote their books, how you touched me. And I thank you, David, for letting us participate. I'm speaking for Gabriella and Avi. And conversely, you're invited to join us. So now we have a full day of Holocaust remembrance. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And we will continue those conversations about how we might be able to be involved with each other's groups. Anybody else have anything? Yes, Isabel.
Yeah, my first question, I have 2 questions. One is for Ruth. I wasn't clear if your mother knew your father's story or about his past. And did she help you out in any way to accept him? Unmute.
Gotta unmute. Okay. No, I was the first person that my father ever told any of his story to. And it was when I was pregnant with my son and we were trying to come up with names, and I knew the names of my parents, my grandparents, but nothing really about them. And so, I'm sure many of you experienced this idea of like, it was just this unwritten thing you're not supposed to ask. Maybe I tried asking once or twice and, was kind of pushed away. But it must have been a turning point for him where he was, I said, I need to talk to you about this. And he said, okay. And he started to tell me. So, he and my parents divorced when I was like 3 or 4. And so, they were, no, my mom never really, she knew he was from Poland, knew that something, there was something, but we never talked about it. No, she never talked to me about it ever. Mm-hmm.
Maybe she just didn't know at all, because
right.
I would think that would come between them in the marriage. If he never opened up to her.
Yeah. I think my whole family knew, my whole mom's family, she had a big immigrant family. They all knew that my dad had suffered somehow, but they didn't know anything about it, like any of the stories.
My second question can be addressed, I guess, by Ruth and by the others. How did you come up with the idea, and what was the process you went through? I think in other communities, people might be interested in doing this.
For myself, I was in a writing group, and we were all supposed to find a memoir type theme, and I didn't know what theme to do. I thought probably separation and loss, because that's been such a major issue for me all my life. And then she said, the leader said, write about what you're not supposed to write about.
Oh, wow.
And in my house, Holocaust was not to be mentioned. It was really something that was not to be talked about. And she further said, that which is hardest to write about is where the juice is. And that's where my writing career started. Everything, all roads lead to the Holocaust, as one member of our group says. Everything, every topic, every writing prompt that I got, my mind went and my writing went to the Holocaust. And then luckily for me, this group in the temple was writing a book on just the topic that I was writing, which was my experience, because I didn't know my parents' experience. I knew my lived experience of the consequence, being in the shadow of their experience. And writing for me was tremendously liberating, because really I was not to talk about the Holocaust. I was not to ask about the Holocaust. That my parents were survivors was an embarrassment to me when I was young. And then in writing, it unleashed my voice. I found my voice. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Fran. Jeff and Stephanie.
Thank you. I want to commend the writers for sharing their story. It was just remarkable. And when I read them, I could relate to so many aspects of it. I also am grateful to see everybody from the group and to think that we started this group and I was involved years ago. We were able to address these issues, have intergenerational meetings, go to encounter groups, and I think that helped my process about my identity of being a child of survivor going back to the 80s and 90s. So I really appreciate that. I do have a question for two of the writers, because I know, Esther, you had siblings that died before you were born, but for the ones who, the other two, I believe you have siblings, what kind of support, what kind of reactions did they have? What involvement in what you brought forth in your writings into this book? What did they say?
Fran, why don't you go first?
I have a strong story about that. My brother still lives by the code that you don't talk about the Holocaust. And he let me know that he was not going to read my chapter. And in writing it, not knowing that he didn't intend to read it, I was really torn about what I could say without incensing him. You know, between hanging out some dirty laundry, things that were not attractive about my parents, and between divulging what to him was supposed to be kept silent. I really worried about estranging him. And then what happened, it took him months and months. First, he bought the book, which was interesting, and it just sat on his bookshelf. And I thought, okay, that's as close as he can get to it. And then he actually read it, which was amazing. And I worried that he would be angry, and he wasn't angry. He just said an interesting thing. He said, it's like we grew up in two different households. I don't have the same perspective. I don't remember the same stories. It's like foreign to me what you wrote about. I said to him, was it so bad reading it, Julie? And he said, no, it wasn't so bad.
I'd like to encourage folks, if you're not speaking, please mute yourself because there's some ambient noise that we're hearing.
My brother he had a very different experience growing up, although he recognized my experience growing up, but his was very different. And he really idolized my dad. Like my dad could do no wrong. And I, so we would kind of fight about that, but he was also supportive and kind of saw how I got treated. So he was supportive of that too. But when I wrote my chapter, I sent it to him very early on, and he's the kind of person who usually gets something, reads it right away, redlines it, he has to give you his opinion, he has to tell you what he's thinking no matter what. And I never heard from him. And it wasn't until after the book was published, and maybe a month or two after, and he said, I read it, and he just wrote to me and he said, it was beautifully written. And I just thought it was a very odd reaction, but I'm going to, just accept that and say, okay, all right, that's fine. But we've talked in our group many times about we need to have some meetings and just talk about our siblings, because it's so interesting, how different so many of us are in terms of wanting to take on the legacy and how we want to take it on and all of that, so, and how we react to the Holocaust in our homes.
Thanks, Ruth. Karen.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all. This has been so interesting. I'm new to the group and my experience is very different, but I won't go into that. My question is, I was struck by the comment one of you made, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who said it, about your parent. It was all about them, that they were self-centered, self-absorbed. And we kind of jokingly talk about my father in my extended family, about how it's always the Dave Wisney show. He was like, and we all thought it was because he, as a child, was a opera singer, or sort of like an opera singer, a child star sort of thing. And we all thought that that was why he was so self-absorbed, because as a child, he was, sort of held up high, but I'm getting the sense that maybe it's really all about how he was 13 when he went into a concentration camp. And I wonder if it's somebody mentioned it as an adolescent thing. It's that he never really grew up. And it's certainly, didn't go to school anymore, didn't have parents anymore. So it's like, wow, maybe the whole self-absorption thing was really more about never having kind of gotten out of adolescence in some respects anyway. And I wonder if that's something that's common to more of you. About your parents. Did your parents was it all about them? Anyway, just as, I guess, a question for everybody.
Yes, for everybody. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. I was gonna say, well, my dad was, he was 13 in Buchenwald. So, I haven't 100% put that together either, but I think I have often thought there's some, I don't know, is arrested development the right word? Like there's some, developmentally something ends at a certain age. And he's, even to this day, he's really very, he's very hard of hearing. And, but if we're talking about him and what he's trying to do with his book or whatnot, he's very engaged, but if we're not, then he's, once in a while he is, but for the most part, not. I'll be interested to hear other people's thoughts.
I think you're right about arrested development, that when there's trauma, psychologically speaking, when there's trauma, there is a getting stuck at that stage. And it requires a lot of working through to get past that. In my family, like for my family now with my daughter, it was always child first. We were focused on her. For my parents, it wasn't that way at all. It was them first. So they went every summer, starting when I was too young. They went on exotic trips and we were sent to camp, for instance. That's an example of overprotectiveness versus neglect, to go back to that. I couldn't understand it. They had so much trouble with separation. How are they sending us off? And they even sent us off for Christmas break to camp, to a 10-day ski camp. And there was an emphasis on what they needed first. And I think it's a reaction to trauma, that you have so much coping skills available to you. And I think there is a resultant self-absorption.
Well, in my case, it's the total opposite. My parents were absolutely not self-absorbed, but of course they were complete adults married with a child when all this happened to them. But to them, I came first and I was the only one who came at all, if I may say that. So their lives were completely taken up by worrying about me. And, seeing that I do well in school and everything is okay about me. And that went into my adulthood, even when I had my children, even then it continued. So you could even say they neglected their own needs. They didn't attend to their own needs.
So
taking care of me.
That's an example, because your parents were adults.
Yeah, my parents were adults too, and also lost a child. My father lost a child. So I think that made them look at us somewhat differently, because they were older, but also in terms of that loss. I was a replacement. So yeah, I was overprotected by them, I think.
I should point out that Karen, who spoke of her father, the opera singer, he became a very successful cantor in Philadelphia for many years, right? Anybody who hasn't had a chance to speak would like to ask a question or say something?
Hi, Avi. I introduced myself for a second. Thanks for Stephen that he invited me. And I would like to answer also to the question that was asked about the age of the parents. I was born in Israel. Both of my parents are Holocaust survivors. My mother was 14 when she came to concentration camp. And as I am, from my perspective today, she never came out. She stayed there. And that's the age, I think, plays a big role in it. And my father was almost 17, and he actually got a lot of resilience through this experience. And I think that one of the reasons is this age gap. My father was very talkative. My mother hardly told anything. And if she told anything, it was something always with complaining. And as Fran told, I was over protected. I was overfeeded. I was everything. I shouldn't climb a tree. I shouldn't run with children. I shouldn't go to the kindergarten because maybe I will never come back, and so on. So it was also a long work for me. I'm also a psychotherapist, as some of you are, if I understood correctly. So I think, yeah, we worked on ourselves. I think one with more success, one with less success. Some topics are over, some not. That's life. And I have no doubt that the age plays a big role in their development later on, or with their ability to cope with that. And yeah, thank you for inviting. I don't know if it's an initiative of Steve or of you, David, but I'm very appreciating being here. I was the one, by the way, that initiated the other group after visiting in the Liberation 75 in Canada 2 years ago, and I saw the need, simply.
Yes, I think I remember you from some of those Zoom meetings back then. And where do you live now?
I'm living in Germany. It's a story by itself. It took me a lot of therapy hours to overcome this decision. It's a complicated thing because I refused in Israel to serve in Lebanon after I've been there in the war, and later on I refused, and I had a choice to go to jail or to go out, and I choose to go out and not to go to jail every year again. So it's another story. It's another story. Something but to do a lot with the Holocaust, I believe. I mean, with the experience of my parents, I'm sure it's have to do with that also.
Well, thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
It's very lovely to have you joining us. Gabriella, do you want to say something?
Yes, first I want to thank you very much for the reading from your book and from the telling us your stories. I live in Munich, basically. So I live, I would say, 20 kilometers far away from Dachau. And my grandfather was in Dachau. He survived because my grandmother gave all the money. They were very wealthy here in Munich, to Hitler directly to get him and my granduncle out of Dachau. Some of my family survived, but most of them were murdered by the Nazis. And I'm living in Germany by accident because my mother and my father were visiting my grandmother. My grandmother and grand-aunt with their husbands came back to Germany after the Second World War, also after the Shoah in 52, I think. And because my grandfather was very German, first German, then Jewish. And he was also a soldier in the First World War and got the Iron Cross. And they built up the Jewish Munich community, my grandmother and grand-aunt. And my mother who survived also the Holocaust. She went out from Germany with 16, but she had horrible experiences before here. She talked a lot about the Holocaust, also, and she talked a lot about her experience and the experience of my grandparents. And she went also to schools, and until she died 2 years ago with 98. And she was a lot, so that she wrote also a chapter of a book, and there are also a lot of interviews and some films about her in the TV, also about me a little bit, because I'm a photographer, and I photographed a long time Steven Spielberg exclusively in Europe, and a lot of other film people. But I'm also, I have also here, we have a foundation named Respect and Remember, and we do a lot about Shoah in schools and exhibitions, and we fight against anti-Semitism here, what is rapidly very high again. And yes, and I'm in this other group, what Avi started, and Stephen. Later on, I'm since 1.5 years, and I'm very happy to meet you. And I would like to ask you in the group if everybody from your parents didn't talk about the Shoah, or some of your parents talked about it.
My parents always talked about it. So
Yeah.
I can't remember a time when I was not aware that something happened to them. I did not know that I was Jewish or what that meant, but I knew that there was a Holocaust. So to me, Jewish meant Holocaust, nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
My parents talked.
Yeah, I had a little different than my father never spoke about it. My father and mother are both from Poland, but my mother spoke to schools as long as I can remember. And she wrote a book about her memoirs. She also died 2 years ago at 98. So just thought of that when you said that.
Yeah.
Once again, this is the book that brought us together today. And I can't recommend it highly enough. The three women who were kind enough to join us today each have chapters. There are 3 of the 16 chapters in this book. This is the second printing of the book. And we're delighted that you were able to be with us today. We hope that, well, we think that what we do is sacred in memory of our parents and our extended families. And we believe that meetings like this are sacred. And so please, I think after an hour and a half, we should probably say goodbye, but I want to encourage everyone to reach out to me. You have my email address, and let's talk about how we can maybe keep our community together, our community of second generation. We see that the third generation is very active in many cities, and we endorse that and support it, and we're excited about it. But we're not dead yet. The 2Gs have something special to contribute to these conversations. And we don't want to see these organizations fall just because we're all getting a little bit older every day. So anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you for wrapping that up. I just have a quick question, Gabriella. Do you know Fred Fisher?
Yeah.
Okay. I know him.
You mean Fred Fisher in Munich?
Yes, Fred Fisher in Munich.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
And can we get a picture before we hang up too?
I took a picture. I took a few pictures. Yeah, I took a few pictures.
David,
and I'll probably post something on Facebook, which I am wont to do, so.
Fabulous.
All right.
could we?
I encourage those of you who haven't friended me on Facebook, please do that. and Isabel.
Just want to announce that our next meeting is in 2 weeks at 2 o'clock for Philadelphia people.
Say that again?
The Philadelphia group will meet again, the Sons and Daughters, in 2 weeks at 2 o'clock. It's February 5th, was it, David?
Yes, and we're going to keep this conversation going with respect to how we can possibly merge our efforts into a stronger organized group of 2Gs. And everybody's input is solicited and encouraged and appreciated. I want to thank Ruth and Fran and Eszter so very much for being with us today. It's been a very memorable day. And I want to thank all of those who joined us from overseas, Gabriella and Avi, and everyone else. It's just wonderful to see you all. Let's stay in touch, okay?
Thank you
so
very
much.
much. And thank you, Stephen, that you brought us in.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
And
Thank you, Stephen.
thank you, David, thank you, David, for letting me bring some people along in regards to the Klymans. And and so we're, as someone said to me once, he said, we're all family. So we're all family.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Stephen.
everybody.
Thank you, David, very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.